Hey, what's up? Last week I just got the Benchmade Contego, and I haven't done anything to it yet. I haven't sharpened it yet. I haven't taken it apart. All I did was put a little oil in the blade tang and the locking mechanism. What I need to do now is take it apart and polish the washers and maybe polish the blade tang and oil the pivot area real nice. Right now it's pretty smooth, but I'm trying to get it a little smoother. It's a little sticky. It's not that bad, but trying to get it to be like the Mannix, easily open and close with one hand. I'm gonna see if I can get the Contego to be this smooth when I pull down on the lock. See if we can get it to swing back and forth. And there's also a gritty sound in the axis lock that I need to figure out why it's causing that, and I may need to polish something, or I'm gonna put this right next to the microphone so you can see the sound that it makes. This is the 470 Emissary by Benchmade, and the axis lock is really smooth. Doesn't make a sound, no gritty feel. Feels very smooth. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and take it apart now. What you'll need is a T6 and a T10 to take this knife apart. You got a T10 here, and then T6 here, here, and here, and that's also on the pocket clip and the other, and it also takes the thumb stud off. I'm gonna first take out the T10, which is the pivot screw. I'm gonna go ahead and take out the T6 screws. Let's see, probably need to take all 3 screws out. I always set the screws, same screw, back in the same hole. So I'll put these screws in order from left to right. Don't have to, it's just something that I do. Alright, let's see if the scale comes off. Hopefully springs don't fly everywhere. Alright, I took all 3 T6 screws out and the pivot screw, and the scale comes right off. So I assume the gritty sound is actually just the axis lock spring rubbing against the G10 inside the scale there. So that's nothing for me to be concerned of. I thought it was metal against metal making the gritty sound. So I shouldn't need to polish anything. I can actually tell right there on the spring it's worn down. The spring is worn. You can see the color difference. That's where it's making contact with the G10, making that sound. So what I could probably do is put a piece of Teflon tape in there so that spring will be sliding against some Teflon. That'll get rid of the sound and the gritty feel. I don't think I'll be able to take off the liner because of the way it's made. Like there's a washer on the axis lock that prevents the liner from coming off. I think the only way to get the liner off is to move this axis lock down into that hole, and you'll be able to pull the liner off. But I don't need to do that right now. To get the blade out, I'm going to push this pivot out. Somehow. Well, this isn't the easiest thing I've ever done. Didn't expect the pivot to be so hard to take out. Alright, let's see if I can push it out with this paintbrush. That is weird. Alright, moved a little more. Oh. Alright, finally got the pivot out. Carefully take this out because I want to make sure I don't get the washers mixed up. I want to make sure I put the washers back on the same side, facing the same direction. So I need to memorize which way they're facing and which one goes on which side. Alright, there's a look at the blade. Those washers are all scratched up. Looks like they're in a box with 1,000 other washers, just scratching against each other. Oh. See, the entire blade is coated with Cerakote. I expected maybe the pivot area to not have any Cerakote. Even inside the pivot hole has Cerakote in it. That's surprising. So the entire blade is Cerakoted except for the blade tang where the axis lock rides against. I may polish this and get a smoother action out of it. Here's a close-up of the washers. I'm going to go ahead and polish these with some mag polish. I'm gonna get these really shiny and smooth. You can see all the scratches in the washers. That has a large effect on how smooth your knife is when you open and close it. There's the blade tang pivot area. As you can see inside the pivot hole, there's also a Cerakote in there, which is a good thing actually, because Cerakote is very close to Teflon. It's very smooth and it resists sticking. It's almost like an anti-stick coating in some circumstances. There's the cutout in the G10 for the axis lock spring mechanism. I want to show you the flat spot on the spring that I was talking about right here. You can see where it's shiny silver and it's actually flat right there. That's the part that's making contact with the G10 every time you operate the axis lock, or anytime you open and close it. That spring rubs back and forth with the G10, and by the looks of it, G10 is abrasive. Now after repeated use, no telling how long, but that is going to wear through the spring, and before you know it, that spring right there is going to snap. It's going to get weak very soon. I've only been using this knife for a week, and I've opened and closed it maybe 100 times. So that's already a noticeable weak spot in the knife. But I'm going to get some Teflon tape and I'm going to put it over the G10 area. That will prevent that spring from wearing down, because G10 is very hard. It's pretty much like sandpaper, and it'll eat through metal. I think where the spring is making contact, by the looks of it, is this area right here. You can see where it's been sliding back and forth. Even though this knife is still heavy, Benchmade did a great job in milling out the liners to reduce weight in any way they could. It's still a pretty heavy knife for what it is, but it is a 4-inch blade. But it did a good job in polishing the blade tang. It looks pretty smooth. Since it's M4 steel and it's very hard to polish, I'm not going to try to polish it yet. It looks like they did a pretty good job. So most of the weight is in the blade, which is 4 millimeters thick. It's a very thick blade. For those of you wondering how I polish the bushings, I use some Mothers Metal Polish, and I put it on a microfiber cloth. Take the washer, just do that there a few times back and forth using very light pressure, and it doesn't take but a minute or two and you'll have a mirror polished bushing. See how dark the cloth gets? It's all the metal coming off the bushing. It's already getting shinier and smoother. Alright, I've spent about a minute and 30 seconds doing this already. The one on the left is the one I just polished, and the one on the right is the one I have not polished yet. So you can see the huge difference it makes, and you can imagine how much smoother your knife is going to be after you do this. I would not recommend using any power tools like a Dremel to polish these. The idea is to keep it on a very flat surface and apply even pressure across the entire washer. If you have a piece of glass or a mirror, I would suggest you use that. You want to keep these washers as flat as possible, and I could definitely get this a lot better. I could get rid of all the scratches out of the bushings, but I think that would be removing too much metal. If you remove too much metal, you're going to end up with a little side-to-side blade play. So just polish it to where it gets a little shinier and smoother, but I wouldn't spend too much time on them. You might end up removing too much metal. Something I just thought about doing that I've never done before is I'm going to weigh the blades before I sharpen them. I'm going to weigh them afterwards, and I'm going to see exactly how much metal I'm taking out of a blade when I sharpen them. The Benchmade Contego, before ever sharpening or doing any maintenance of any kind to the blade, weighs in at 2.109 ounces. In grams, that would be 59.795 grams. Alright, I just finished polishing the phosphor bronze bushings. I did not polish the other side, just the side that's contacting the blade. Now remember, when you're doing this, you're just polishing the metal, you're not trying to remove metal. If you really wanted to get a perfectly flat mirror surface, you could go to the 2500 grit sandpaper and place it on a piece of glass. Alright, here's the side of the bushings that contacts the blade, and this is the side that's in contact with the liners, with the steel liners. So that's what they look like before, and then after the mag polish, they look like that. I may later try to drill some small holes with some tungsten bits that I have for the Dremel to make it like the Chris Reeves washers that hold the grease or oil better. I may try that out, since these washers are actually large enough, because these are some pretty large washers. The washer diameter is about 15 millimeters. So these washers are pretty large. A lot larger than the Mannix. So I might be able to drill some small holes, and I'll let you know how that goes. Another thing I'm going to do is polish the pivot. See, the blade rotates on this pivot here, and it's looks like a stone washed finish. So I'm going to go ahead and polish this little piece here. Should get a little smoother action out of the blade. The pivot on the Contego is a 6.88 millimeter pivot. It's almost 7 millimeters. So you can expect nice even wear on the pivot. Usually the larger the pivot, the less blade play and less wear associated with opening and closing the blades over a long period of time. I'm going to see if I can polish the pivot by using a Dremel with with some mag polish. Alright, I'm about done now. It's taking me about 3 or 4 minutes of off camera work to get it almost completed here. So it looks pretty nice. You want to spend a little more time on that area because there's a flat spot. You want to spend more time on that sharp edge right there, because if there's anything that's going to take off the Cerakote in the pivot area, it's going to be that sharp edge. Whenever you open and close the blade, that edge might catch into the Cerakote and it might end up scraping the Cerakote off. So I spent a little more time on that edge to make it smoother, round it off a little bit. Should be good enough. I don't want to remove too much metal. Just polish it. If you remove the metal instead of just polishing it, you're gonna get a little blade play, and that's gonna be up and down blade play, and side to side actually, maybe, unless the washers have a tight enough tolerance. But either way, a loose pivot is not good. See, to get this knife apart, all you'd have to do is take off the screw on the other side and the pocket clip, and then remove the scale. And after you remove the scale, you'll be able to move the axis lock and then move it down to this hole right here, and then you'll be able to pull the axis lock mechanism out. But for now, I want to go ahead and put it back together and see what polishing the washers and the pivot, what kind of a difference that makes. I went ahead and ran it under the faucet with some soap and a toothbrush to clean out the blade tang and pivot area, to remove the old lubricant, to prepare it for the new lubricant. I'm going to go ahead and place the lube on the insides of the washers, which makes contact with the blade. I'm going to put some oil on the blade. And I'm going to place some oil inside the pivot area. And I'm going to place some oil on the pivot. And then I'm going to place it back together. When I put my knives together, I always make sure I put the washer on the same side every time. I know this side goes on the top with the polished side of the washer on the blade. And the washer should stay there. The oil should be thick enough to hold the washers in place. I'm going to go ahead and place a little oil on the other side of the washers just in case the washers do turn. They could use a little lubrication. Go ahead and slide the blade back into the liner. I think it was easier to do when the blade was in the closed position. I'll try that. This is the first time I've ever disassembled it, and I've never reassembled it, so I may be making it look harder than it actually is. I've found that it may go in easier if you put it together with the blade closed. And then you may have to pull back on the axis lock a little bit to get the blade lined up. The hard part now is getting the washers to line up with a pivot so that will slide through. Alright, got it through the first. Alright, finally got it through the blade tang. Now I just need to get it through the last washer here. And that's it. Place a little lube in the spring hole. And along the spring where it makes contact with the liner. Go ahead and finish tightening up the pivot. Already put the T6 screws back in. Tighten it up just a little bit and see how that is. Pretty nice. Tighten up a little bit more. That's pretty tight right there. Oh, too tight. Alright, it's about where it's going to be. It's a little better than it was. Say that's good enough for me. Feels smoother. Alright, here's the Mannix. This is how smooth the Mannix is. And this is the Contego. You want to make sure you have your fingers out of the way when you close this, because it drops fast and it's a heavy blade. Pretty satisfied with the results. I got it to be as smooth as the Mannix. Only took me about an hour. You can even operate the axis lock with one thumb now. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and please subscribe.